All right, we are here today with Josh Pigford of Baremetrics and many other previous ventures. Thanks for being here, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Garrett.
Could you give me a quick overview of your background and your history and how you got to where you are now with Baremetrics?
Yes. So I've been a self-proclaimed maker of things for probably I mean really since I was a kid, but in the like web side of things for a solid 15 years. So it started just like making random things really back in high school, and then that kind of like everything was sort of a stepping stone, and then that I built a couple of random SaaS products years ago, and then ultimately Baremetrics came out of that. Was sort of like trying to scratch my own itch. So that's where we're at now, and I do that, Baremetrics.
So that's one of my favorite things about Baremetrics, or the story about Baremetrics, is that you didn't just come up with an idea and launch an app. You had a couple of apps that kind of, in a roundabout way, led you to Baremetrics. Do you kind of have some color for that story and kind of how that unfolded and how you realized and how Baremetrics came about? Were you building it for yourself, or did you realize there's a business opportunity here? What came first?
Yeah. So let's see, this was 2000 and maybe 10, 2011, something like that. I had two SaaS products, both in the kind of the survey space. Super vanilla SaaS products, like, you paid $29 a month, $99 a month, whatever. And so I needed all these metrics, MRR, lifetime value, churn, et cetera. Or at least I assumed that I did. There was no real great way to get it without doing spreadsheets and things like that. So initially this came about with like me trying to not have to build something myself. I mean, I'm opposed to that kind of thing. But I tried a bunch of different products that were out there, like more higher level analytic stuff like Kissmetrics or Mixpanel, which have some really basic stuff in there already, but I could never get what I wanted. And I was always afraid that I was doing it wrong, like, because it all was based on you putting the data in there.
Yeah.
So it did not solve the human error side of things. And so I finally was just like, well, Stripe's got all the data. Let me build this internal tool. So I built an internal tool. Like, there was still not this, hey, I did not see it as a business opportunity initially. But started talking to other buddies who were building SaaS companies and really kind of struggling with the same stuff. And they were like, yeah, man, I need that. So I built the first version. It was about over a month from when I had the idea, like, hey, I could make this like a little side project. It was probably about 7 or 8 days of coding to get that first version out the door, and that was November 2013, so 3 years ago. So that's kind of where it came about.
Yeah, nice. So it was a side effect of a project. And I think that's kind of, the more I've talked to people, the more so many of the implicitly successful products didn't start out where somebody decided, I want to build a business. They decided, I want to solve a problem, and a business was just the side effect.
Yes, which is, I mean, that's the double-edged sword there. I mean, I think the big drawback of that is it's dangerous to think, well, because I have this problem, somebody else does too.
Yeah.
And so you like make this artificial assumption that you like, yeah, there's absolutely a market for it because I need it. Well, you might be the only guy on earth who needs that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's at the same time, I think it's a great entry point. Because a lot of times people go into, I hate to say like entrepreneurship, like it's like a field of study or something. Like, to me, it's just, I don't know. I would say most entrepreneurs, quote unquote, are just like born problem solvers. Like they're just like fixing things, whether it's on the internet or something literal like a physical object. It's like I like to solve problems, and I think when you've got a history of that, the scratching your own itch thing like naturally leads to some stuff where in a way that's different than just sitting down and staring at a screen until you think of a business idea.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So there's always validation that needs to happen in one form or fashion, but that for that kind of spark, it helps a lot if it's coming from something you just genuinely wanted to build, create, and then kind of accidentally a business is born out
Happens.
of it. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's helps reduces some of the stress when you're not going into it from this like I've decided on this idea and I really want it to work. Like, no, I'm just building a thing I need to build anyways. And if I can turn it into something cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you probably have some deep opinions on, since you run a metrics app, is metrics in general. You started out because you needed these metrics. And
Right.
so now as you built the app and have all of these metrics, kind of what would be your advice for people to, as they're coming into this, how to leverage metrics and get value out of them, or, just how
Yeah.
to fit them into their business?
Right. So if you're just starting out, ignore them. Don't sign up for Baremetrics. Like if you've got less than I'm gonna go low. Well, okay, if you've got less than like 10 or 20 customers, really probably even higher than that, there's no reason to sign up for any metrics or analytics service. Really, even not even just talking about like revenue, anything, like even like traffic and stuff like that. The only thing that matters at that stage really is like, am I making money? It doesn't even matter the exact amount of money that you're making. It's just like, okay, I made $100 this month. How much did I make? $200 the next month? Did I make $500 the next month? Like all these little tweaking. So when it comes to metrics, every metric is, think of it like a knob to twist or a lever to move up and down. They're just sort of like little tools. And the problem early on is thinking that the numbers actually are meaningful at that stage, and they're not. But two, thinking that you can have a big meaningful effect on them. Like if you're early on, if you're like, hey, my churn's 10%. Well, man, you got 10 customers. Like it's a big deal if one of those leaves. That's 1/10 of your entire customer base. But it doesn't matter that early. And so you can get obsessed with numbers and like affecting numbers that early on don't matter. There's too many other things that you should be doing to grow the business than like caring about if a number has increased 30% or not.
On one hand, you're not going to have any kind of statistical significance with any
Exactly
data at that point. And then on the other hand, seeing a churn rate isn't what's going to improve the business. It's talking to your customers and really building those relationships that can then help expand the business, learn where the business is falling short so you can fix those problems. But yeah,
it's like it's pre-optimizing. Like it's like the guy who's like, man, we need to build this thing. We need like 50 servers, and we spend like the next 6 months having just this insanely like robust backend system, and nobody signs up. Like it's solving problems you don't have yet. Yeah. So yes, I think you can absolutely care about metrics way too early.
That's always a difficult line to walk, though, too, is when is too soon and when is too late. Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of the ongoing challenge of growing a business, I think.
For sure. Well, I think you end up, I think that metrics can be a really, especially when you're like the founder, it's easy to get distracted by busy work that you end up doing these random tasks because like you might be putting off the really important stuff because it's freaking hard. Or you're just not sure what to do next. So you just like pick the easiest path to go down. And so you end up, metrics is one of those things where you can like feel like you're doing meaningful work, and there's not, like by staring at the numbers. And I think it can be a really huge distraction.
I literally have a poster right here that says, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted.
Yeah. So spot on.
So you've grown a couple businesses, and you've bootstrapped, you've raised money. In your experience, kind of what have been the pros and cons, and what advice would you give to somebody else who's trying to make that decision? Do I need to raise money? Can I start this on my own? How's that been for you?
Yeah. So a little backstory. Baremetrics was bootstrapped to, oh gosh, I can't even remember what it was. I think we were doing maybe $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month. It was probably close to $20,000 a month. And most of that was just me by myself. I mean, by that point I'd started like hiring some freelancers and stuff. And then there just ended up having something kind of fall on my plate. I had turned down a lot of investment offers because I've been bootstrapping stuff for a decade. Mm-hmm. So a really sweet deal popped up. So Baremetrics was initially built just for Stripe. Stripe approached us to do The initial thing was a $500,000 investment for what amounts to about 5% of the company. So, I mean, that's a sweet deal. Like, I don't care about percent of ownership per se. Like, I certainly didn't care about 5%. I mean, it's like the whole equity thing's a whole whatever. But the terms of the deal were extremely ideal. Like, it valued Baremetrics at like $10 million. So like, okay, like there's nobody gets like a board seat. Nobody can tell me what to do. Like it still, as far as on paper goes, was a no-brainer. I mean, it was free money for all intents and purposes. Just the terms of it were such that it would have been crazy to not take it when you look at just the paper. Now, the dangerous part that we're like on the tail end of finally like figuring out and fixing is that so what most businesses use fundraising for is to hire, to bring on more developers or a couple designers, whatever. And the problem is like, go back to like twiddling with knobs. You can't adjust those knobs that much. It's because you're talking about people's lives, right? People's employment with you. So where it gets super dangerous is hiring a lot of people. And then as founders, we tend to be really overly optimistic because we have to be to make something out of nothing. And we assume that we'll grow enough to cover ourselves on the burn rate side of things. And that's why there's so many startups that fail, because they raised $10 million in funding, $100 million in funding, and they hired 1,000 people, and then turns out they couldn't make enough money to cover themselves. So that's my big thing is like, I'm not opposed to fundraising, to like raising some money. I don't think it's inherently evil. It's just money, especially there can be some bad terms, but if you get good terms, like, okay, cool. But when you start using that money to bring on people who then are now depending on the business to grow to keep up with that, it's so stressful. Holy crap, it's freaking stressful. And I mean, we had we like back in June, we realized that we were spending way too much and we were about to run out of money. And so we had to, like, I took a 30% pay cut. My whole team took a 15% pay cut. And like, we're just now 6 months later starting to like increase everybody's salaries because we've been mostly profitable for the past couple months, and trajectory should be fine.
And that's obviously not an easy thing to go through, to ask people, hey,
exactly.
Consider this.
And that was my fault, right? Like, if I had properly planned that stuff and not been overly optimistic, I think like we didn't really have like a finance person in place then early on, especially when I took on that money. And I should have had somebody like, I'm not a numbers person in the like accounting sense. And so like just crunching 1,000 rows of spreadsheet numbers and figuring like drove me crazy, and I avoided it. And so that's my thing with fundraising is like, it's not inherently evil. Like, it's the whole Mac versus PC thing. Like, who cares? But like, you can use it, you can screw it up pretty bad.
Yeah, it's a tool just like anything
tool.
else. And and the terms I think too are a big factor, because everybody focuses on the dollar amount naturally because that's the quantifiable thing. But the terms on that can really, really make it difficult and put you in a tough spot and make it miserable.
I think like what when you hear about stuff like sort of VC horror stories, a lot of that stuff is actually not even in so what I had was technically sort of like an angel round. So it's like the terms of those are actually usually pretty favorable, other than like sometimes people get some like the terms will be bad as far as a % of ownership or something. But like other stuff, you don't really get into this like really scary, like now I as the founder only have 20% of the company and all these people are on the board who could like kick me out of the company. That stuff doesn't happen until like you were like 3 rounds of funding in and you've made some pretty bad decisions. So like bootstrapping stuff, I mean, doing some like a small angel round really isn't bad if you are really great with managing finances and like keep an eye on that stuff. And if you don't use it for hiring people, I don't think it's a bad deal.
Yeah. So the other thing for you though, too, it kind of fell into your lap because of a couple factors. One, because you had bootstrapped, so you were in a healthy spot. And
I could
two,
prove that we had value.
had you started the demo.baremetrics account at that point?
Oh
So
yeah,
it
that had
was
been
fully
around for a long time.
transparent. So
I knew.
yeah, so this kind of came around by virtue of you building the business to a point where it was healthy, and thus you were
Yep.
at least, you weren't begging for money. It was just,
No.
hey, here's some money. What do you think? You're like, oh, wow, it's kind of hard to say
Okay.
no.
Right. And I think that's another thing too, is that people think that I can't, I mean, that they are not able to even get something off the ground without some money. Like it's like the fundraising thing is the first thing that they do. And it's like, no, like prove something first, like
There's
try to get a customer,
there's way too many tools like just spreadsheets and Zapier or something. You can cobble together something that will help somebody achieve something. And there's plenty of people that aren't capable of thinking about all that, don't recognize those tools. Start out, build it all via web interfaces and these tools. And then once you've got people like, oh my God, that's so cool, you're saving me so much time, then start to automate it, invest in it.
Yeah.
There's
I think
a lot of ways to start cheaper.
people just want too much too quick.
Yeah.
Like, and it's sort of the whole thing. Like we want what it took our parents 30 years to get.
Yeah.
Like we want it like right away. And that, I mean, part of that's the byproduct of there's so many things at our fingertips that, didn't exist a decade ago. But I think like having some patience, like I know for me personally, over this past like Thanksgiving break, like I had this sort of like epiphany, at least in my head, of like realizing like I don't care about the I've felt this sort of false sense of urgency with building Baremetrics. Like we got to do this, like as though there's this imaginary finish line that like we could potentially be last to, but there's no finish line. Like we're building stuff. It changes, whatever. There's competition. Who cares? Like, and when you think of it, there's not this end goal that you may or may not win. There's no urgency. Like you just want to build something great, and it makes things so much more pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the transparency note, you've got a lot of customers now that have kind of jumped on board and they're full on with transparency. Based on talking to them and their experience and your experience, what have kind of been the pros and cons for transparency?
So I think the huge caveat, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to, I'll publish how much we're making, is what's the story that you're telling with it? Mm-hmm. So I think transparency for transparency's sake is irrelevant. Like it doesn't necessarily matter. I don't think you win any sort of business brownie points by being transparent. Like you don't get a badge or anything. Like I think when like for Baremetrics, it makes a ton of sense because our market is other businesses. And one, it shows off the product. Great. But two, us helping other businesses by giving insight into an actual business helps them, which is great. But two, it also helps us get new customers as well. So, but we're able to tell this like story about how businesses run and like the fact that it's not all like, unicorns and puppy dogs. Like, and I think when you're able to use that to tell a story, whether that's a business story or just like, I know some businesses do that, it's like they want, Buffer's a great example where like they don't have a financial product of any sort. But they've built this entire company around the idea of like, we have nothing to hide. Like you can trust us. It's like there's a face, being transparent almost gives a face to the company. So, but I think if you just do it sort of like, if you just sort of do it halfway, if you're like, hey, I'm gonna make my Baremetrics dashboard public, and then you never do anything with it, then you'll see no tangible benefit whatsoever.
The only tangible consequence I've heard from folks is if and when you ever get to a point where you want to sell the business, a lot of buyers who aren't necessarily online buyers, who are more traditional business people, don't like that. It makes them uncomfortable that information was out there.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole thing. I mean, I remember when I was playing with the idea of making our Baremetrics dashboard public. I mean, the feedback I got from a number of people was about not doing it was because it's like, well, if your competitor knows what your churn rate is, or the lifetime value of a customer, or people who aren't competitors but are looking to start a business and they see like, man, the lifetime value of that customer is like $5,000. Like I could build something and if I could just make 1/10 of that, like that'd be great. And it brings about a lot of competition. And I do think that's partially true. I mean, there's been a dozen Baremetrics knockoffs. I mean, almost to the pixel. So like it unquestionably brought about some competition, but at the same time, I think when you're doing stuff legitimately and like you're not just motivated by like a quick buck, you'll be fine. Like there's so many of those. At 99%, I mean literally 99% of those Baremetrics knockoffs were gone within 6 months. Like they just don't stick around. They're trying to make a quick buck and they realize it's hard to do this.
Exactly. You look at it, if your motivation is just to make the money and not because it's something you're excited about or passionate about for whatever reason, then you're not going to have the fortitude to stay with it. That's right. Of course, that's why half of the title of my book is sustaining.
Right, because
anybody can start it.
that's the fun, exciting part, right? Yeah. But yeah, the sustaining part's where you're just like want to stab yourself in the eyeball.
It's kind of like a fire, right? Anybody can squirt lighter fluid all over a pile of logs and get the fire to start, but it's maintaining that fire all night long that's the hard part.
Yeah. Yep. Totally.
So from your early products, what was kind of is there a single lesson you could say that you learned from those products that translated directly to Baremetrics beyond the whole idea for the business? Mistakes or
sure. I think a lot. I will say two things. So pricing is one where I probably went way too traditional early on. Like felt like I needed like a $9 a month plan or something like I felt I didn't value my own business enough early on in those previous products. Like, thinking like, I should charge more for this. So with Baremetrics, I intentionally started on like the higher end. Like I wanted it to feel a little too expensive. And then just stick with it. And that's what we did. Our very first customer was a $249 a month customer on Baremetrics, which for me was just like, I was losing my mind. I was so excited when that happened. Right. Like, yes, I picked a really high price, at least in my mind. And like, it worked. Like we've got customers who are 4 or 5 times that now as far as what their monthly payment is. But I mean, like early on, like, man, I'm glad that I didn't start off low because it's much easier, I think, to like offer some lower options if you felt like you needed to, but it's much harder to be like, hey, we're tripling pricing, so the pricing stuff, like charging more upfront, because it also naturally weeds out some less than pleasant customers. And then also, I think maybe this is my personality, but I did this in other businesses and I carry that through to Baremetrics. And I think it's really paid off for us is, being as like high touch with customers as possible. Especially early on. I mean, I hopped on the phone with every customer, every one of them. And regularly, like we still have an automated email sequence to at least offer to hop on a video chat there's like a 3-month one, a 6-month one, a 12-month one, like an 18-month one to like say like, hey, let's just talk shop. I'm not trying to sell you on a thing. Like I just want to know how your business is doing and if I can help. And a ton of people that's a ton of my time is just spent hopping on video calls with customers.
You invariably get feedback and a lot of serendipitous feedback that somebody wouldn't email you about, but they'll mention in a conversation.
Happy to talk about it. Right. So, we were very intentional with that with Baremetrics, but I had done that before, just kind of little bits here and there, and realized like, hey, those things were beneficial. Yeah, so, I do think there's a lot of new businesses, especially first time, people who are doing it for the first time around, like get really scared to talk to humans, and like, and it can be awkward at first, but then you just figure it out. But that's so important.
Yeah. So you didn't have baremetrics.com at first, right? It was IO at first. So there's usually a story behind getting a .com.
Yes.
I don't want to go. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but there's usually something fun to get into here and some experience for people who want to get that .com for their own business eventually.
Yeah. So when I came up with the name for Baremetrics, everything was available as far as like the Twitter handle and Facebook, but like the .com was taken, and it was like a GoDaddy landing
Yeah.
page with a huge butterfly on it, and that was it. And then it said like it was like filler text, like, this is my site, welcome to my site. Like, there's nothing there essentially.
Yeah.
And so I had reached out a dozen times over the first year trying to get the .com, and I never heard anything, just never heard back at all. And about a year in, this is right after we had gotten $500,000 in funding.
Yeah.
Which was very, I mean, again, transparent, like all over the web. You just search for Baremetrics, and it was like the top news thing was that we'd raised $500,000. And so then I realized that, like, hey, I can try to get this domain through GoDaddy's like domain buying service. And so it's like you just make a bid, like there's no even like, buy this domain now for $20,000. Just bid on something. So I was like, oh, well, what do I have to lose? I think it was like $70 from GoDaddy to just use the service.
Yeah.
So I do it, and I bid, like, I think I put in 600 or something like that, or 550. I can't remember exactly. And holy moly, a few days later, it worked. Like, they came back and they're like, the so-and-so accepts your bid. I'm like, wait, what? Seriously? Like, all said and done, it was like $616 to get this domain, where, like, again, if this guy had just searched for the word Baremetrics, would have realized I've got $500,000 sitting in my bank account. And maybe that's just a decent human being in the domain world. Yeah. Surprise, I guess. And I had it. I mean, I was I had spent a year trying to personally go out and do it, just sending an email, and I got no response. But the GoDaddy thing, holy moly. I don't like GoDaddy, but, like, man, they came through.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So one of the things that, and this could be a long conversation, we talked about on Twitter a little bit, with cancellation processes. And I'm a huge advocate of automation on many reasons, for the customer, for cutting down on support, for all sorts of stuff. But you do bring up the very good point that it is one of the best ways to kind of spark a conversation at a critical time where there's a huge learning opportunity on why they're leaving.
Yep.
I tend to believe that cancellations don't happen in an instant like that. They happen over a month or 2 months while they kind of lose interest and fade.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience with that? Obviously, now y'all have changed over. I assume you haven't changed back. So you have an automated cancellation process now, but you had a manual process where they had to email you for a long time.
Yep.
How did that go for you? What were some of the pros and cons? I mean, it sounds like you never had anybody upset about having to email, which is fantastic.
Sure.
Tell that story.
So this came about, maybe a year, might have been like a year and a half or something like that, where we were having serious churn problems. I think we were double-digit churn, and we were just having the hardest time. Like, we were doing so we had an automated cancellation. You just click the button. I even think we had we had a text box or something where you could put in why. We may have even required the text box, but it was still automated, and we were getting no good feedback. People would just, like, type in random stuff into the text box, like nothing useful. And we would do follow-up emails, like, right after they cancel, saying, hey, would you mind giving us a reason, or can we hop on a phone call? No feedback from that. Like, we just weren't getting any traction, and we're having a really difficult time figuring out why the heck people are canceling. And so with double-digit churn, like, we got to do something. Like, that's a bad spot to be in. Totally. So we said, hey, let's just we'll take down the automated thing and just make it click this link, and it brings up a chat window. It wasn't even like you had to open your email inbox. It was like an intercom chat window popped up, pre-filled, where it just said, hey, I want to cancel my account. Okay. And they hit send, and usually we'd respond within minutes most of the time. And so we said, let's just do that. Let's see for what happens. And we started getting really great feedback. Like, and I think the chat interface helped that a ton, because we were really intentional about responding to these super quick. Like, we auto put them in their own inbox and intercom. So, like, we knew, hey, this needs, like, high priority response as quick as possible. And so the chat interface made it so that it wasn't like they're sending this email off into the ether and hoping that somebody sees their cancellation request. It was like, They're talking to a person right there.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, two things would happen. One, they would like give us amazing feedback. When we could have, and because we were having a chat, you're able to like keep a conversation going to get even better feedback. Or they would say like, I really needed this like feature X. And we could say, hey, here's a link. We have the feature. So that's great feedback for us to know like we're doing a terrible job of surfacing this feature. And two, we're solving the problem and then they want to stay a customer. So like we're getting great feedback and we're even actually helping some people not have to cancel. And so really it just stuck around. Like we had no intention of even keeping it around that long, but we just kept getting great feedback. And I mean, I can count on one hand the number of people that were upset even remotely. I mean, there were a couple people who were it was like I had killed their dog.
It's a very,
but you get it.
Black and white thing for some people.
It is, right?
I get if you're going to do it, your reasons and the motivation was right. The immediacy was right.
Yeah.
I think, emailing versus live chat's a big difference there.
Sure.
And I think being responsive and it makes a big difference. It's not like you said, emailing out into the. I think emailing it's a lot more, maybe not totally black and white, but a little more black and white there, where you shouldn't have to email. But a live chat, you're not even leaving the interface.
Right. You're still right there. And I think a lot of people come into the conversation from the cable company is like the classic. Like I got to call my cable company, and the whole time they're spending like an hour trying to keep me around and like, screw that, right? So
upsells and
like
a discount.
If you stay around for I will give you 6 months free. Like we never tried to like push people to hang around. And but eventually, that being said, we've over the past few months like started realizing the feedback from that has progressively gotten less useful. And I think that's because we started solving a lot of the common problems that were happening. So in that whole Twitter conversation, which was like over the course of a full day with a dozen different people, John O'Nolan from Ghost made this really great point, like if you're able to ultimately help 1,000 people better by inconveniencing a dozen people, then like there's a trade-off there. Like that's business, like you can't make everybody happy. And if we can ultimately long-term make something better for a whole lot more people, and a couple people kind of get upset, like that's a trade-off I'm willing to make for the long-term success of the business. But yeah, like I said, a few months ago, we started realizing the feedback wasn't great. And so we decided, I feel like we could probably get better feedback by not having the open-ended text thing, though that's still there, but having like pre-existing radio buttons to choose from. And the feedback has been more quantifiable and kind of more actionable at this point. So
yeah,
I'm still happy with how we did it. And I think like there's a time and a place for it, especially early on when that's so critical to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely some subtle tactics on how you approach it that make a very big difference in the nefariousness of it.
Yep. Yeah. Because I remember that, there's lots of SaaS companies that do it, and you do have to like phone in or send an email. You don't hear back for 2 days or something. And like
funded ones.
I know, right? Those guys are terrible.
So we're kind of getting towards the end here, but I've got a couple more the kind of universal questions. What's the worst day, the most difficult, stressful thing you've dealt with since starting Baremetrics?
Mid-June.
Besides that of this conversation.
Right. Mid-June when I realized we're going to run out of money. Yeah. And I'd had a hunch that things were getting kind of tight. And that's a buddy suggested, hey, talk to this finance guy. He'll put together like a spreadsheet model forecaster thing with all your expenses. And a week later, he's like, hey man, we can hop on the phone. And sure enough, man, that was a pretty terrible day.
How were those conversations with the team?
I mean, everybody on our team's been, has really done amazing, given that I asked them to take a pay cut. And I think like that conversation that day, like it was our like weekly morning stand up, and it was like I just jumped into like, hey guys, bad news. Like, but it was obvious, like when I'm able to show the graphs of like, here's if we don't do anything, here's if only I take a pay cut, Here's if I take like a 50% pay cut. Here's if I don't get paid anything. Here's what happens if everybody takes
So
a
you ran
5%.
through multiple choices.
I showed them like asking you guys to take a 15% pay cut is the best option we have right now to not lay anyone off.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, they took it as well as they could.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's going to take that and celebrate, but yeah.
Right. But everybody really has done amazing.
And now if you feel like it's bouncing back well and everybody's
we increased
future and feels good about things.
Yeah, like we've backed off on the pay cuts, and within the next 30 to 60 days, everybody will be back to full 100%.
Right on.
So
that's good.
Yeah.
So this may dovetail right off of that, but if you could go back and do one thing differently, just one thing, what would it be?
It's related to the funding. I would not spend the funding to hire people. I mean, I right now still, I think the wound is fresh.
Yeah.
I would hire like one person or something, but I hired like 5 people. And so
that's a lot.
It's way too much. And again, it's like the nozzle that you can't, it's like, it's a water hose that you can't like just turn it off. Whereas like spending that money on like marketing or customer acquisition.
It's a dial that adjusts this way really easy, but it doesn't come back without.
And it does not go back. So yes, I would say I misused the funding that I took on.
You would have been more cautious.
Yeah, I still. I mean, the money again, great terms, nothing wrong with it. But the way in which I spent it, I was not. I should have been much more frugal.
Yeah, no, that's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, so that's the end of my question. Is there any kind of parting words you have, or anything you'd want to say to somebody else who wants to start their own app?
Yeah. I think the only thing is like stick with it. Like, it's fun. Like it's the whole premise of your book, man. Like the fun part's the early stuff. And then when you launch it and you get 2 customers and then it stays at 2 customers for 2 months, like, man, that is just the biggest kick in the gut. And, but you just have to keep trying stuff. And I think a lot of people give up too quick, or they go and think that, yes, raising money is somehow the solution to their problem. But I think just like, yes, stick with it and then like get good at selling. Like you need to understand why people buy stuff and make them give you money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, man, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Cool.